Hello, I'm Brett Knowles from the Risk Scorecard Network. I'm going to be walking you through this quick example of how to build a risk scorecard. This example is focused on a small manufacturing organization, but the principles remain the same whether you're a service organization or a not-for-profit. The idea is this: we need to combine an organization's strategy with its risks, either in the form of the risk register or, as we will see today, through risk categories, to eventually build out a risk register. And from there, we can add metrics to create the risk scorecard. So let's start off with taking a look at how it is best practices allow you to capture your strategy. In this example for Frederick Industries, it's a small company that manufactures different types of tubes, tubing that's used in heat exchanges, moving fire water around industrial sites, conduit for moving cables, and even structural elements. Now, if we go to their website, even there they identify some of the key strategic objectives that leadership would like the organization to pursue. Things like promote a safe workplace, profitable growth, deliver great service, be the low-cost producer in their sector, and a whole bunch of other strategic objectives. So the lesson is here for most organizations, we don't need to invent a new strategy. We just need a way of capturing the existing strategic objectives, as we've done here. Now, what we'll use is the balanced scorecard in the 4 perspectives. The concept there in profit-making businesses is that your overall goal is to achieve financial success. To do that, you need to make your customers happy. To make your customers happy, you need the right internal processes, and to build and maintain those processes, you need the right enablers, competency, culture, enabling structures. In the public sector, it's the same framework, except we move the financial perspective down to the bottom, and instead of calling them customers, in your case, we'll call them stakeholders. So we should now be able to move those objectives into the right perspective. So in this case, obviously profitable growth is a financial objective. Things like build loyalty, quality product, and great service are customer objectives, and so forth. Now, what we're going to begin building is what we call a strategy map. The next step is to show the cause and effect relationship between each objective. So, for example, to achieve profitable growth, there's 2 things we need to do. One is to build loyalty, and second, to be the low-cost provider. So how are we going to build loyalty? Well, it seems to be that there are 3 things we need to do: be the low-cost provider, produce quality product, and great service, and so forth. So by working with a leadership team, we can begin to define the cause and effect relationship between the strategic objectives and overall success. Now, the next step is an interesting one. These are your strategic objectives, and you've achieved them by just harvesting existing strategy documents. But we now need to prioritize these objectives. They can't all be equally important, because of course, if everything is equally important, then nothing's important. So leadership needs to prioritize these objectives. Now, their prioritization will change year over year based on strategic priorities, economic realities, and so forth. In this case, we're going to set up a weighting that looks like this. Our key objective is around continuous improvement, but closely related to that is being a low-cost provider and improving inventory management. Also above 10% is anticipate customer needs. So the majority of the strategy is encapsulated in these 4 strategic objectives. And that's what strategy is about, prioritizing this over that for this particular period of time. So now we have a strategy map which identifies the strategic objectives and their priorities. This becomes the first building block we use in building the risk scorecard. That describes strategy. Now, about describing your risks. We advocate using some form of risk universe or a risk breakdown structure that is an industry-proven wide selection of risk categories that might encompass risks that your organization would bump into. Now, there's many of these categories and frameworks available, and the trick is to find one that best suits your industry or your situation. If you want, you can pop us a quick email and we'll send you along links to many of the more popular categories. They include things like COSO, ISO 31000, and so forth. The idea here is by using risk categories, you can use those broad categories to survey leadership to see where they might think risks are occurring. To phrase it another way, some risk practices have you just interviewing the leadership team. But of course, there's a bunch of weaknesses with that. Sometimes the leadership team would not have been exposed to a risk and not think of including it, think that they've got control over the risk and not include it, and so forth. So the risk categories give you kind of a zero-based review. So now let's do a strategic risk assessment against those categories. To do that, what we'll do is list the strategic objectives down the left side of a spreadsheet. And across the top, we'll list those risk categories. And what we'll be able to do is to rate both the risk likelihood, and just use the standard scale that risk practices use, 1 to 5, where 1 is rare and 5 is almost certain. And then rate the impact of those risks from insignificant to catastrophic. Again, the same 1 to 5 scale that most risk frameworks use. Now, the advantage to this is we now know exactly what the risk impact is likely to be associated with each objective. So, for example, here we have a risk impact of 4, major, against this objective. But this objective only has a 4% weighting. The same impact of 4 against this objective of 16 probably means this risk is more significant to leadership team in the near term. Obviously, if we did scenario planning or changed the strategy over time and these weights changed, so would be the relative impact of this score. But you don't have to rescore them. And as you score off all the risks, you can begin to get some visibility of where that risk is occurring. In fact, you can plot this in the traditional risk scatter diagram. On the left, we'll chart the risk likelihood, and across the bottom, we'll list the risk strategy points, so a multiplication of the risk impact times the strategic objective weighting. So in this case, you'll see that the ERP implementation failure goes in the top right-hand corner of the highest likelihood of occurring and with the highest strategic impact. This allows us to quickly align which risks we need to pay attention to. But it's important to note that this chart is just an hypothesis. It's our guess about impact and our guess about likelihood. It's an interesting conversation piece, but we now need to move towards adding metrics in to get a harder reading. So what does that look like? Well, we should be able to take that risk breakdown framework and the risk categories to build the risk scorecard. Now again, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to take those strategic objectives and weightings and list them down the left. We're now going to list those risk elements across the top, and we're going to take a look at 3 factors. And I'll drill through those in a bit more detail because this is important. First, we're going to review and show the reader what the impact is. So again, that impact score that we did, we're going to use a little signal strength icon to represent that. Then we're going to score the risk performance. So in this case, we're looking at the KRI, and we're saying, what is the impact if this risk occurred, ERP implementation failure, on the strategic objective of profitable growth? And we'll find a KRI metric that's appropriate. And we'll ultimately be giving this a score from 1 to 10 based on that performance. Now this bar is calculated by multiplying the weighting times the impact times that performance score. What does that mean? It means the larger that bar is, the higher the risk is that's occurring. So in that example I talked about before, where we had an impact of 4 and a weighting of 4, in this example it has an equally poor performance, but when I multiply performance times impact times weighting, this bar is not as big because of the weighting. This is a strategically more important risk that looks like it's occurring. So the risk scorecard allows us to quickly be able to see where are the specific risk nodes and what of our strategic objectives are at risk based on the risky behavior. Now we can also add those bars up to give you the overall score by risk element. And again, eventually we can even plot that in the scatter diagram. Now what we can also do is begin taking a look at this across multiple risks. We can quickly see where risks are occurring and begin servicing some unexpected results. In this case, this risk looks like it has a higher net position, even though it's got 3 greens. Why is that? Well, because they happen to impact 2 of the highly weighted strategic objectives. We can also see which risks not only are expected, which specific nodes we're concerned about, and even what strategic objectives happen to be at risk by adding up across the overall risk chart. So in this case, we can take a look at what the absolute risk is by strategic objective and the strategy weighted risk. And again, it's simple mathematics by taking a look at that weighted risk, both using the strategic weighting and not to get visibility of where it is risks are occurring and leadership needs to pay attention. Now, there are many more webinars out there, both in YouTube and at riskscorecard.net. For those of you who'd prefer not to talk to people, I encourage you to go out there and learn on your own. But risk is a complicated process, and to be honest with you, many of the methodologies are quite confusing and overwhelming. We urge you to give us a call if you have any questions. So long as we can answer your questions over the phone or through WebEx, it's all free. So call us and we're glad to help you out. Enjoy your risk journey.